The Israel of God is the mystical body of Jesus Christ. The new Israel is the church. Lumen Gentium, dogmatic constitution on the church. The church is the new Israel. We need to show solidarity with the Christians. How would you feel as a Christian in the East, having to see that no one in the West is speaking up for you and giving you a voice while your family members are being slaughtered?
By the way, my name is Joe McClane. I host a radio program called A Catholic Take, where we look at the world through a Catholic lens. I'd love for you to hang out with us. If you like it, give it a thumbs up and let us know what you think in the comments below. Joining us now is Dr. Matthew Tsakanikas, professor of theology at Christendom College. You know, there's a great conversation going on. I would like to say it's great, but it's really controversial because we seem to be being pushed into one of two camps. You're either 100% pro-Israel or you're apparently a terrorist, or vice versa. There's apparently no middle ground in that conversation. I found a very interesting article by Dr. Tsakanikas over at Crisis Magazine, crisismagazine.com, against Catholic Zionism. Highly recommend it. We're going to put a link to it in the show notes for you today. I want to start right with that sort of big, confrontational, really edgy point, and that is we're not allowed to really have an opposing opinion. I mean, the pro-Palestinian protesters wouldn't want us to have an alternative opinion. The Israeli government doesn't seem to want us to have an alternative opinion. And God help you if you express that opinion publicly, because then they come out in droves. Why is that?
Well, I think you'd be surprised that actually the Israeli government, even more recently, maybe we'll have a chance to discuss what they've been saying, but they'd probably be in agreement with what I'm saying. And so, of course, the title Against Catholic Zionism is one that it was shortened from the original in order to fit the format for Crisis Magazine. Originally, it was called No Longer Your Grandfather's Zionism, in dialogue with St. John of the Cross and Benedict XVI. Now, of course, it was shortened. So it's not that you can't be a Zionist. You certainly can. You can hold to a political form of Zionism, which is what the church allowed. But it was the religious form of Zionism that the church is still against. Because it's a false prophetic and it's a false doctrine, religious Zionism. And so you have to walk that proper ground in the discussion of Zionism. I would say the Israeli government itself just came out more or less opposing and even referring to the ultra-nationalists who hold to religious forms of Zionism, actually labeled them Jewish terror groups.
Wow.
As settlers. And that just came out a couple of days ago by the head of Shin Bet, and by the head of the defense ministry, both cabinet positions, speaking against other cabinet ministers that were holding to religious Zionism.
Yeah, I've got an article here that you sent me from the Times of Israel, and we'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. Headline says, Shin Bet chief warns Netanyahu ministers that Jewish terror is endangering Israel. I find that very fascinating, especially since there's nothing but vitriol on Twitter or other places. If you dare weigh into these conversations, you're an anti-Semite. Is this a simple case of overreaction? Overreaction from, say, the Holocaust? Overreaction from that period of history that was so bloody and so devastating for so many? Or is there something more political or nefarious going on?
I think it's just simply super complex from over years of history regarding what Zionism is and its various interpretations and the religious fervor that's involved, not only from those who became the settlers and known to be colonizing Palestine under Zionism, but also the reaction of the Arabs being pushed off their lands. Not only are many Christians, right? You have to remember, Palestine was very Christian in the 1900s. And so you also have the Muslims responding with their religious beliefs against the Zionists, the Jewish Zionist beliefs. And so it's just a hotbed of religious difference on top of political differences, and the evolving political situation from the downfall of the Ottoman Empire after World War I. Even before then, the Zionism under the Ottoman Empire already happening through various forms of Jewish messianism. And then by World War II, the horror of the Holocaust and the persecution of the Jews that occurred in Nazi Germany. And then the settling of that land that had already taken place, and even more favor going towards a homeland for the Jews, based on an ethno-cultural political viewpoint, not on a specifically religious viewpoint. My main point in what I've written is to make clear that it's the religious Zionism that we cannot accept, that somehow this is fulfillment of prophecy from the Old Testament of some kind of final exodus of the Jews. That's what I fully reject. From the political science standpoint, we have to remember, and this is shocking to most people if they're not familiar with the history, certainly when Theodore Herzl, and he records this in his diary, and Theodore Herzl went to Pius X to realize the Zionism that was taking place under the British. Pius X was very clear. He absolutely rejected it in every way possible, especially because of religious belief and Catholic belief, Catholic doctrine regarding that Jesus is ultimately the fulfillment of all the promises to Abraham, and that therefore Jesus is the true land, the true temple, and Jesus is fulfillment of all prophecy. So you have to now interpret, which is what the article was based on, you have to interpret what the promises of the land are spiritually. And that's where I brought St. John of the Cross into the discussion as well. But what people miss, the Vatican did not really accept even that early form. It just tolerated it as to what was going on because it saw religious confusion entering in over the issue. It was actually not until 1993, and so this was about the time of the Oslo agreements, that the Vatican decided to formalize relations with the state of Israel in an official recognition based on working out with the Palestinian Authority a solution over the land and which land would belong to which people, which is basically was always leading to what was the two-state solution. And so the Catholic Church ultimately, this is where the article begins, which was the title became Against Catholic Zionism. It opened with the 2018 article in Communio, the international journal, Communio, International Catholic Review, in which Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI in 2018 in the German edition made very clear, we only accepted the Israeli state based on a Catholic doctrine, which was that it was not the religious fulfillment from the Old Testament. And so based on that, we accepted it on its political terms that the Jews needed a homeland after all the persecutions. They were already settled there under the British from the 1900s. After the withdrawal of other governments and the establishment in 1948, there was already a state there. And so we were willing to accept Israel as a state based on its political existence, not in terms of any religious fulfillment, which is a huge problem that we find in the United States, where so many evangelicals are supporting the idea that this is the fulfillment of a prophecy. And I see that as the denial of the recognition that Jesus was the fulfillment of the law and the prophets, and therefore anything regarding the land is fulfilled in Jesus Christ, and therefore land and race became obsolete with the coming of the ultimate and new covenant. Protestantism doesn't properly recognize Jesus as the temple. Now, I wish they would understand works better. We're justified by faith apart from works of law. That's a reference to the Jewish ceremonial temple. Works of law are what belong to the Jewish ceremonial temple. That is what faith in Christ has replaced. But he didn't replace the idea that there's no longer a temple. He became the temple. And since they don't truly grasp the sacramental understanding that the Catholic Church possesses, they can't understand how Jesus is functioning as high priest in his today in the ministry of body and blood, the baptized, who are therefore being built into the temple. Now, the promises of the land in Old Testament Israel were for the very sake of establishing a nation so that a temple could be at the center of that nation. And so the whole point of a physical land was for a physical temple. Now that that physical temple is obsolete because Jesus became the temple, there shouldn't be anyone trying to, God wants to give that physical land back to anybody. It's very clear that Jesus handed it over to the Gentiles repeatedly in Matthew 21, that vineyard would be handed over to new tenants and it would be under the feet of the Gentiles, as Luke describes, until the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled. But what's the time of the Gentiles? It's not the replacement of the Jews. It's where Jew and Gentile have access to the Holy of Holies through Jesus Christ. Jews and Gentiles, no one's being replaced. We're not replacing the Jews. The Christians are the ultimate Jews. We are the fulfillment of all the promises. God had the whole point of the Jews was to bring the Messiah. So Messianic Judaism or Messianic Israelite religion, and the Messiah is the Christos. So what God always had first in mind was Christianity, not Judaism. Judaism was the means, Israelite to Judaism, because you remember, Judaism comes from the tribe of Judah, the surviving tribe after the Assyrians wiped out and it became Samaria. Now all that was left of Judah. So the practice of Israelite religion through Judah was always about bringing the Messiah. And so Messiah is Christos. So Christianity is what everyone was waiting upon.
Yeah.
So to be a fulfilled Jew is to be a Christian. And we Christians recognize our debt to all the blood shed by the Jews defending the law and the prophets. And so that's important.
It seems like even evangelicals want to rebuild this. Even many Catholics would rebuild this wall today. That is bizarre to me. What say you?
I'd say it's horribly bizarre. The whole point of the promises to Abraham, the land and nation, first promise, Genesis chapter 12, verse 1, which the article discusses, the dynasty, which is the name, a great name. And so this is how we knew that the Messiah would come from the line of David. The third promise was the ultimate intention, a worldwide blessing, a blessing that Abraham's descendants would be for all the nations. God's plan was always to bring all the nations through his firstborn son into his covenant family. And so the reason the dividing wall went up was to purify Israel of its sinfulness so that it could be made holy, not to keep it to itself, but in order to bring it to all the nations, to bring them into God's holiness. This is what Jesus accomplished, becoming the temple and breaking down that dividing wall. Now, here's where it gets scary. I would say, people see that title, and I already explained what the original title was, and I think, well, this person's, maybe this person's another anti-Semite. I'll be really clear. I want the political state of Israel to make it. It's important to me. It is a liberal democracy in the Middle East. And when I say liberal, I mean it in the sense of in which the ancient context of liberalism, while meaning more the 18th century context or 17th, was the idea of autonomy. In other words, self-governance, the idea that we don't want big government, and so you need to develop virtue in order to self-govern yourself. We have that as a political state in Israel. We believed it was going to be that kind of political liberal democracy. I want that to survive in the Middle East. It's important to Christians. Yeah. It's important to Jews. It's important to Muslims. I want that. Now, what I'm going to say is going to be controversial, but it's not me who said it. I've already explained that the current cabinet ministers, that the article you're posting that came out of the Times of Israel, they were criticizing the radical Jewish settlers who are causing the problems, and they labeled them terrorists, and that they are bringing disgrace upon the nation of Israel. But there's a more important statement that was made. It's recorded in the AP News. I believe it was about September of 2023. And that is when the former minister of Mossad from 2011 until the year 2016, the minister of Mossad, that was the chief of Mossad, Tamir Pardo. And most people wouldn't be familiar with this, and I only know it because I was watching Judge Napolitano have a conversation with John Mearsheimer. And so I looked it up, and it's very clear that not only were some ministers saying they're worried that Israel's becoming an apartheid state, the former head of Mossad in 2023 said Israel is an apartheid state.
Wow.
Well, that's not good for liberal democracy.
No, it's not.
We can't have that. There needs to be some kind of solution in which Israel's ministers don't have to make those kinds of criticisms, and we who repeat them don't have to look like we're crazies because we're not just repeating what the political news cycle or our political party says.
Yeah.
We have to be Christ first.
Yeah.
And so we need to break free of this matrix that many people describe that's controlling us, and we need to think with the church. We need to think especially with the New Testament and the apostolic preaching and teaching as presented to us through the church fathers, doctors, and the authentic magisterium of the church, to understand prophecy, how to understand that the Israel of God is the mystical body of Jesus Christ. It says it The new Israel is the church. Lumen Gentium, dogmatic constitution on the church, paragraph 6.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, paragraph 9.3. Paragraph 9.3, the church is the new Israel. Paragraph 9.3 of Lumen Gentium. You look at paragraphs 6, it's very clear. It talks about the land and that the Christianity has become the field of God and has scriptural references. Stop sucking up to politicians.
Amen.
Stop sucking up to political parties. Stop trying to make a name on Twitter by the way you suck up to politicians and political parties. It's got to stop. There are Geneva Conventions that are being violated. All sorts of international agencies have been testifying to it. And while I know the UN courts have been misused by political interests and the rest, there are many important things that are being said there. You cannot ignore when the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem is pleading for help, and he signs a letter discussing how women are being shot and murdered by the IDF on church property in the occupied territories of Palestine.
Yeah.
In Gaza. And we know certainly there's a lot of abuses going on in the West Bank that the very Israeli ministers are trying to stop. And many people believe this is only going to get worse because now we see ultra right-wing leaders within the cabinet of Netanyahu. It's growing, and it's believed it's going to get worse. So we need to show solidarity with the Christians. How would you feel as a Christian in the East having to see that no one in the West is speaking up for you and giving you a voice while your family members are being slaughtered? And it's not just about the Christians. There are innocent women and children being slaughtered and not able to access food and water, contrary to Geneva Conventions. And what too many, I should say, in Israel, following right-wing extremist ideologies, are advocating collective punishment.
Yeah. Did you like that video? It's okay. You can admit it. It's perfectly fine. Hey, we cover the big stories of our day, from inside the church to outside the church to all points in between, and we do it from a Catholic perspective. It's called A Catholic Take. It's a radio program Monday through Friday. We live stream it right here on this channel, by the way, so make sure to subscribe, like, and share. We would be very grateful to you. And don't forget, you're going to want to watch this video right here because you don't want to miss anything.